What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter Burnett. In today's episode, it's going to be a full one. There's a lot to go over after a very busy rivalry week on the field and then a lot of action going on off of it. Before I get into it, though, if you're going to enjoy this video and want to see more like it, please feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel, and turn on those post notifications so you're always up to date whenever I upload. The biggest news is what happened off the field, and it's the coaching hires that kind of happened all across college football. Because of the calendar, they're required now to make a lot of these hires right now to get in for that, winter transfer portal. I think, these hires, you didn't used to really see hires too often right when the season ended. You see plenty of firings, but you didn't really see many hires. And now because of the calendar, we're seeing it. And obviously the big story is Lane Kiffin to LSU. If you want to see a further kind of breakdown of that, and these other hires, let me know in the comments below, and I'll maybe put together a fuller video. I just want to go through my initial thoughts and reactions to some of these hires. To me, Kiffin is a lot like Lincoln Riley in my mind. He's a young coach. He's accomplished a good amount, but to me, he hasn't quite proven that he's able to win that big game yet. It's kind of how Lincoln Riley was at Oklahoma. He at least got the Sooners to the college football playoff. It's certainly how he is at USC. Kiffin's kind of always been that. Obviously, there's all the off-the-field drama that comes with him, but LSU certainly has the resources to put together a winning program, as they showed with Ed Orgeron and Joe Burrow in 2019. Some of the other hires, really an interesting one, kind of came out of nowhere. Pat Fitzgerald going to Michigan State. He was just recently cleared for all the hazing and all that stuff that happened at Northwestern. So he's kind of getting a second chance. I think he's a really good coach, and this will be a good opportunity for him. John Summerall going from Tulane to Florida. Obviously, that's not the Gators' number one guy. I still think it's a good hire. Again, a lot of these other hires, if you want to hear more about it, I can get more in depth in a different video, either maybe later this week, more likely kind of in the off season, or maybe between kind of conference championships and the playoff. But next up, Oregon offensive coordinator Will Stein is going to Kentucky. The Wildcats fired Mark Stoops, which was kind of both a surprising move, but it also showed that the Wildcats now want better than what they've gotten. Now, this was a down year for them, but they had still been a pretty consistent program, year in and year out. So they showed that they're ready to move on and ready to try to get better. You got James Madison head coach Bob Chesney going to UCLA. Pete Golding is going to replace Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. Ryan Silverfield is being hired by Arkansas. I think a lot of people look at that as like Arkansas making the worst hire out of especially the SEC teams. But I think that's actually a pretty good hire for the Razorbacks. Silverfield has put together some good teams at Memphis. I know they kind of lost some of those bigger games this year, but I still think he's a good coach that could potentially build there in Fayetteville. South Florida's Alex Golesh, a Columbus guy, going down to Auburn, to the Plains to coach the Tigers. And then Eric Morris, the head coach at North Texas, is getting hired by Oklahoma State. So again, if you want to hear more on those coaching hires, I'll maybe make a video more in depth about it, but there's so much more to go over on Rivalry Week, so I'll save that for a later video. First off, when it comes to the games, I could finally say on College Football Talk, as an Ohio State fan, the Buckeyes beat Michigan, and it was really a case of kind of out-muscling Michigan, out-physicaling them, and this time, unlike last year, out-coaching them. They break the 4-game losing streak. They outran the Wolverines by a fairly wide margin. They outgained them by an even larger one in total yards. And they also held the Wolverines scoreless in the second half. And really, after those 2 field goals early in the first quarter, it was all Buckeyes really the rest of the way. Some good throws by Julian Sayin, some good runs by Bo Jackson. Obviously, Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate made some big plays, and Ohio State is 12-0 and under Ryan Day going to the Big Ten championship game for the first time since 2019. Next up, another big storyline. Texas shut down the Texas A&M offense, which has been really good this season and kept their college football playoff hopes alive, albeit kind of on fumes. The question is, the Longhorns do have a case. They have a couple of good losses, especially that one to Ohio State, the number one team in the country, but they also have that loss to Florida. They've struggled in some games, going to overtime against Kentucky, struggling with Mississippi State. So I think with 3 losses, Texas is probably out of the college football playoff field, but they definitely threw their hat kind of into the ring, so to speak, in this final, or I guess the penultimate rankings, and then we'll see how things change with conference championship games. Georgia's offense struggled, kind of something that we saw maybe a little earlier in the season that seemed to be corrected, but it was kind of an issue again against a Georgia Tech defense that is not one of the best in college football, to put it bluntly. And for Georgia, for the Yellow Jackets, they're simply put crashing out of the college football playoff race. You know, they were a team that was not only in the discussion, but they were in a discussion of, can this team get in, maybe even if they don't win the ACC. Now they're not even going to get a chance to play for the ACC championship game. So tough end to the season for a good Georgia Tech team and a good quarterback in Haynes King. But that's kind of how things shook out there. So shout out Arizona. They put together kind of an under-the-radar, sneaky, really good season. I was kind of keeping an eye on them as things kind of developed in the Big 12. They finished the regular season 9-3 with a win over Arizona State. The defense forced 5 turnovers in that battle for the Territorial Cup out there in Arizona. And the Wildcats, again, finished 9-3. Brett Brennan, a good turnaround. His first year, they went 4-8. It's at least a 5-win improvement. We'll see if they can win their bowl game and get up to kind of what is that benchmark of a double-digit 10-win season. Texas Tech routs West Virginia. They're setting up to meet BYU again in the Big 12 championship game. Oregon shuts down Washington, a 26-14 win for the Ducks. Malik Benson had a big game with 100 receiving yards and a touchdown, one late to kind of put that game away. Oklahoma holds on in what was kind of, again, another ugly pedestrian win over LSU. Their defense continues to show that if they can shut down a team in the college football playoff, because they're going to be in the field, I think at this point, if Oklahoma fell out, I would be truly shocked. That would be a story in itself. But they're going to get in. Their defense is going to give them opportunities. It's just a matter of if their offense can finally start to click again. They haven't consistently ever since John Mateer went down with his injury, so we'll have to see if the Sooners are able to kind of figure that offense out in the playoff. Next up, Miami routs Pitt 38-7, and kind of like Texas, they keep their college football playoff hopes alive. Now, I'll go over later in this video my rankings. It's kind of like a top 16, but I think the Hurricanes really have a good argument, especially with that win over Notre Dame early in the season, even a win over a good South Florida team that might not be in the college football playoff picture anymore, but that's still a good win, and they're going to be finishing 10-2. Also in the ACC, staying there real quick, Cal upsets SMU, which shakes up the ACC title game picture. Virginia rolled Virginia Tech pretty comfortably, and they're going to face Duke because of a significant matchup between what was I think 1-10 Boston College against a 3-8 Syracuse. That game, because Boston College won, it gives the head-to-head. I think it went down to the 5th tiebreaker in the ACC, and Duke won that because of having the best record among, I think, their conference opponents. So it was the 5th tiebreaker, and there were 5 teams in the ACC that were tied at 6-2. So kind of crazy stuff there. Finally, Vanderbilt wins big over Tennessee. Diego Pavia kind of boosts his Heisman case. He put up some good numbers and a couple of touchdowns in that game. And Vanderbilt gets the first 10-win season in program history. What a fantastic job by Clark Lee. I don't think it's quite going to be enough for the Commodores to get into the playoff, and it really is tough. If you would have told me before the season they'd be 10-2 and miss out, I would have said, what, is everybody else going 11-1 or something? But it's just the simple fact there's a lot of 10-2 teams. Even a team like a Texas that's has one more loss than them, but beat them on the field. So I don't think you can put Vanderbilt ahead of a Texas. You can't put them ahead of Alabama. But shout out to the Commodores. There were, I think, like 3 games this season where I thought they would lose. I think it was LSU, Missouri, and then even this one. And they ended up winning those. So great season for Vanderbilt. Finally, quickly going through the FCS playoffs here. Yale, Villanova, Rhode Island, Abilene Christian, Illinois State, North Dakota, South Dakota State, and then South Dakota all advanced to the next round. The matchups in the second round, Villanova at Lehigh, South Dakota at Mercer, Illinois State at North Dakota State, Abilene Christian at Stephen F. Austin, North Dakota at Tarleton State, Yale at Montana State. That's a good matchup there. I think that might be, to me, the most interesting one. Either that or South Dakota State at Montana, and then Rhode Island at UC Davis. So that's kind of the breakdown of all the rivalry week action. And I wasn't sure if I was going to do this in this video, but that first portion went fairly quickly. So now I'm going to go over my college football playoff CFT rankings, a top 16 of the teams that I think are worth being in the discussion. There's a couple teams in here, especially kind of more towards the tail end, that their only way I think really to get in would be to win their conference championship game. But let's kind of run through it real quick, just from 1 down, because I think number 1 is pretty obvious and there's not as much consequential, not as much at stake here at the top. You've got Ohio State at number 1. You've got Indiana at 2, Texas Tech 3, Georgia 4, Oregon 5, Texas A&M 6, Ole Miss 7, BYU 8, Oklahoma at 9. And here's where things get interesting. To me, I have Miami at 10, Notre Dame at 11, Alabama at 12, Texas at 13, Vanderbilt at 14, Utah at 15, Virginia at 16. Pending the Big 12 and SEC title game results, and even the other group of 5 conference championship games, and of course the ACC as well, with Virginia being there, Notre Dame, Alabama, Texas, Vanderbilt, and Utah would all be out of the field. Now that, based on like even the AP poll and the previous college football playoff rankings, might seem like crazy, but this is not my projection of what I think the committee will do. Because if it was, I would leave the rankings pretty much what they were last week. This is what I think, just based on resume most of all, head-to-head actually probably even better than resume, but you kind of have to go through the resume first, and then when teams are comparable, then you go through those head-to-head matchups for teams like Miami and Notre Dame. Obviously, that's the big one. That could be the cutting line. I don't think the committee is going to put Miami ahead of Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame has created enough separation in their eyes. But I think those two teams, Miami, I think the way they beat Pitt really helped me out. Otherwise, I probably would have had them probably behind Alabama and Texas. But I think they are deserving to get into this field because of that win over Notre Dame. So those are my thoughts. Obviously, you guys can roast me in the comments if you want to, but that's kind of what I think. Now going over kind of what's at stake in these conference championship games. The ACC and Group of 5 results are really important. Virginia is obviously in with a win in the ACC title game. They're already ahead of North Texas and Tulane and James Madison. But James Madison and or North Texas, the winner of North Texas and Tulane, James Madison obviously playing in the Sun Belt championship game, North Texas meeting Tulane for the American Conference. There's a chance that both of them get in, but certainly one, I think most likely the winner of the American is basically a lock for the playoff. But if Duke wins the ACC championship game, both James Madison and the North Texas Tulane winner would make the college football playoff as the next 2 highest ranked conference champions. I don't see a world in which Duke gets in ahead of either one of those conference champions. Now, where things really get interesting is if James Madison loses in the Sun Belt Championship and Virginia lose, then North Texas Tulane, the winner of that game, is a lock. There's no debate there. But who's the next highest ranked? Do you give it to Duke? Do you give it to the Mountain West winner, who's going to be either UNLV or Boise State? That's where things really get interesting. I don't think the MAC has a case. I don't think the Conference USA winner is really going to have a case. But who do you give it to? Who do you give it to if James Madison and Virginia both lose? That's where things really get interesting. Elsewhere, it's kind of down to like rankings. The Big Ten result really doesn't matter too much, which sucks because it's 1 versus 2 in a conference championship game. I mean, if this was the BCS era, one of these teams goes to the BCS championship game, likely against either Texas Tech or Georgia. And then, or if either one of those teams lost, things would be really interesting in the BCS, but that's a discussion for another day. If Ohio State wins, I think it's Ohio State number 1, Texas Tech and or Georgia at 2 or 3. If both of those teams win, it would probably be, to me, again, I have Texas Tech ahead of Georgia. I like how they've looked. They have, I think, fewer questions than Georgia does. So I would have Texas Tech at 2, probably Georgia at 3, and then Indiana at either 3 or 4. Or, of course, if neither Texas Tech or Georgia wins the conference championship game. Then Indiana probably stays at 2, and then you've got Oregon probably sliding in there at 3. If Indiana wins, I think it's pretty set in stone. I think it'd be Indiana 1. As long as Ohio State doesn't get drilled, they probably stay at number 2. And then 3 is anybody, Texas Tech, Georgia, or Oregon, depending on what happens in those games. Now going over the Big 12, if Texas Tech wins, the Red Raiders are ranked, I think should be guaranteed to be ranked number 2 behind the Big 10 winner. I think the committee probably puts Georgia, if they would win, ahead of them, but I would personally put Texas Tech ahead of Georgia. BYU would miss the college football playoff, and with that result, there's a chance then that Notre Dame would get in. If BYU wins, then they would obviously get the auto bid. I think Texas Tech drops a little bit, but I think they'd still be locked into a first-round home game, so no lower than number 8, and that's how things would look there. Now going over the SEC, if Georgia wins, the Bulldogs are ranked number 2 or number 3 behind the Big 10 winner and the Big 12 winner if it's Texas Tech. I think then the Crimson Tide would miss the college football playoff. Now, if Alabama wins, the Crimson Tide are obviously a lock for the playoff. They're going to be ranked behind the Big 12 and Big 10 champions, but that doesn't really matter because they'd be the 3rd highest ranked conference champion. They make the college football playoff. Georgia, I think, similarly would drop. I also don't think, though, like Texas Tech, they would drop past being a number 8 seed. So finally, kind of a lock portion of the teams that I think are at this point a lock for the college football playoff. So I'll pull back up probably my rankings right now so we can kind of go over this field. Ohio State is not only a lock for the college football playoff, but I think they're also a lock for a top 4 ranking, which means they're a lock for a first round bye. Indiana similarly is a lock for a top 4 ranking and a first round bye. I think Oregon is a lock for probably the top 5. Because of their loss to Indiana, they're not going to be able to jump the Hoosiers even if Indiana were to lose the Big 10 championship game. So you're behind Ohio State and Indiana, and then either Texas Tech and or Georgia, or neither of those teams, of course, if they both were to lose. But Oregon is locked into being a top 5 team, which gives them a pretty good opportunity to get a first-round bye. Texas A&M and Texas Tech, to me, are pretty much locks for being a first-round host. I think Ole Miss as well would be a lock to be a first-round host at this point. Georgia also, to make the college football playoff, likely to be a first-round host. I think Oklahoma is also a lock to make the college football playoff. And to me, unless the committee ranks James Madison ahead of both of these teams, the American Conference Championship winner, either Tulane or North Texas, would also be a lock for the college football playoff. So that means Ohio State, Indiana, Oregon, Texas A&M, Texas Tech, Ole Miss, Georgia, Oklahoma, and the American Conference Championship winner. That's 9 teams, which means there's about 3 spots up for grabs. For BYU, I have them ranked at 8. I think the committee is probably going to have them a little bit lower. For them, it's all about winning the Big 12 championship game. I don't think you're going to be able to get into the field if you lose that. Whether that's fair or not, I think it is. We have to, make these conference championship games have to mean something, but it is unfortunate for the Cougars. So they're kind of that team that, based on my rankings, is right on the fringe of almost still being in the field, even if they lose to Texas Tech again. Of course, if they win, they're in anyways. It doesn't matter. Miami, nothing's going to really change for them, but because of how the committee has ranked them, I cannot say that the Hurricanes are a lock for the college football playoff. I can't say that Alabama is either. Kind of similar story to BYU. I think the Crimson Tide probably have to win the SEC championship game. So that's kind of BYU and Alabama I would group together as those 2 teams I mentioned earlier that have to win the conference championship game. And then, you're looking at Notre Dame is there also, similar to Miami. Nothing's going to change for them. I really do think it should come down to a comparison between those 2 teams. And you have to value what happened head to head. Whether Miami is the better team, I think they've looked more like they could be on par with Notre Dame recently. But whether they're actually on par is up for debate now. But that's what makes the sport interesting. It's really what makes it great is, there's so many teams. I mean, even there is a case for Texas. Now, the thing is, I think they would probably need BYU to lose to Texas Tech. I think they would need Alabama to lose to Georgia in the SEC championship game, and then maybe they would have a chance. But that's where things really get interesting here. I think there's so much to look forward to. I'll kind of preview the conference championship games later this week, maybe get into this a little bit more. But those are my thoughts. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of the coaching hires, what happened during rivalry week, and then what you kind of are looking for the committee to do tonight. I'm recording this Tuesday morning. Hopefully get it out before the rankings come out. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you've watched to this point in the video, thank you so much for taking the time to watch College Football Talk. I'm your host, Peter Burnett, signing out. Peace.